inviting me. I teach at Harvard University in the Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations Department and in the Committee on the Study of Religion. My research focuses on the interaction between Islam and politics in the modern Middle East. I'm particularly interested in studying modern Muslim states and their religious institutions, as well as modern Islamic intellectual history in the Middle East, Europe, and North America. My first book, Gardien de l'Islam, published in 1996, was about the institution of Al-Azhar in Egypt and its ulama, religious scholars' relationship with the state. And from then on, I have continued to be interested in Islam and politics in the modern Middle East, including North Africa, hence my second book on Moroccan Islamists and the monarchy, published in 2008. Yes, so my new book, which came out in 2024 at Princeton University Press, The Making of the Modern Muslim State, Islam and Governance in the Middle East and North Africa, examines the role of Islam in governance and debates about it in Muslim-majority countries of the modern Middle East through a geographically and conceptually broad approach and through a longue durée analysis that embraces the 19th and 20th centuries. So the conventional approach to the role of Islam in governance is to focus on organized Islamist movements and their opposition to the authoritarian and supposedly secular states of the region. And my approach is broader. It's not confined to recent history or to Islamist movements. I study debates about the role of Islam in governance among a broad set of protagonists through constitutional history since its beginnings in the 1850s in Tunisia and in the 1920s in Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon. And I also quantify state religious expenditures in Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, and Turkey since the late 19th century or early 20th century. This allows me to illuminate one of the most important political divides in contemporary Middle Eastern societies. And I can highlight three main points here. My first point is the following empirical regularity. In Middle Eastern Muslim majority countries, except for particularly religiously fractionalized Lebanon, and including Turkey, despite its constitutionalization of laiklik, that is secularism, there has been a broad agreement across the political spectrum that the state, among other duties, should be the custodian of Islam, the preferred religion. This means that it should protect and support Islam as well as the Muslim community and Islamic institutions. And it implies that there is no state neutrality toward religion and no separation between Islam and the state, although we sometimes find aspirations to separate religion and politics, which is different. These aspirations have often been misinterpreted to argue that Middle Eastern states are secular in the sense that they are neutral toward religion or that religion and state are separate, which is not the case at all. So this does not mean that religious and political authorities are necessarily conflated. They may or may not be. In fact, differentiation of religious and political authorities is much more typical since the state custodianship of Islam has often been exercised via a partnership between the ruler and the ulama, the religious scholars. And it does not mean that the state cannot also protect other religions, only that it protects and supports Islam more than other religions. It also does not mean that there cannot be domains of equality between Muslims and non-Muslims, only that they are not equal in all domains. So by broad agreement on the issue of the role of Islam in governance, I mean that you rarely find political actors who in public spaces of deliberation defend the idea of separation of Islam and the state or the idea of state neutrality. In other words, the political adversaries of Islamists are not secularists, although they are often called that. So instead, I call them liberals, and I call Islamists conservatives. What they disagree on is how the state custodianship of Islam, the preferred religion, should be carried out. Conservatives want to expand the role that Islam plays in governance, and liberals want to reduce it, not eliminate it. Liberals want to reduce the constraints imposed by Islamic principles on governance, and they want to reduce the extent of state-funded Islamic provisions, such as Islamic education and worship infrastructure, which conservatives want to increase. On the other hand, liberals sometimes want to separate religion and politics. For example, they might want to forbid Islamist parties or political activities in mosques to ensure a state monopoly on religious affairs. They might also reject the organization of political competition alongside sectarian lines. But this is often to keep the political ambitions of religious minorities at bay and to ensure that Islam remains the one and only state-preferred religion. So my second point now, in the book, I historicize this political cleavage, and I find that the broad agreement about the necessity of the state custodianship of Islam as the preferred religion and disputes about its implementation are not new. We find them in pre-modern and modern times, and in a wide variety of contexts, such as pre-colonial, colonial, authoritarian, and democratic. And so you will encounter them in the various chapters of the book, from early forms of constitutional governance in the 19th century through post-Arab Spring experiments in democracy. This goes against conventional approaches, which blame colonization, nationalism, and the nation state, or recent socio-economic dysfunctions for what is referred to as the politicization of Islam, as if political contentions about the role of Islam in governance did not exist before. So this helps me reassess in chapter 4 a well-entrenched received wisdom, the novelty of the Egyptian Muslim Brothers ideology when their society was established in 1928. It was one of the first and most important organized Islamist movements to enter mass politics, but it was only one of the many new protagonists in a long-standing political battle. So the gist of the Muslim Brothers political project, the expansion of the role of Islam in governance, long preceded them and was in fact in continuity with a conservative tradition of political thought, which was, I show in the book, notably expressed by conservative ulama. And this also means that the Muslim Brothers project, or more largely what we call political Islam, is not the result of economic woes or other political or socio-economic dysfunctions, as is often argued, although of course Islamist parties, like other parties, may feed on socio-economic problems when they are in the opposition and may be hurt by them when they are in power. So it does not help much to think that they will fade away once these economic and social problems are addressed. And from a policy point of view, I would say that it is important to keep this debate alive, preferably under democratic conditions, and not predict that either side will moderate its stances or fade away. And third now, to move to my third point, one of the most salient aspects of the state custodianship of Islam and the object of chapter 5 of the book is the financial support that the state provides to Islamic worship infrastructure and personnel, Islamic education, and where there remains Islamic courts and Islamic forms of public assistance. And of course, there are disputes about the extent of this support and tugs of war between liberals and conservatives that lead to short-term fluctuations in the amount of these state-funded public religious provisions. So a striking feature is that in relation to GDP, the state financial support is not necessarily that large. In the countries I looked at, it has represented and continues to represent less than 1% of GDP, which is significantly smaller than what is spent on religion, for instance, in the US today, about 2% of GDP. Another significant difference is that in the countries I looked at, public religious provisions have mainly been and remain a state affair, whereas in the United States, civil society is the main contributor. Another striking feature is that although state religious expenditures have significantly decreased as a percentage of other public expenditures, a state secularization of sorts that mostly took place in the 19th century, as GDP per capita was stalling and the state started to grow in size, they nonetheless increased significantly in per capita real terms, that is adjusted for inflation. So what does this mean? It means that society is now more exposed to public religious provisions than it has ever been. And this increase mostly took place in the 20th and 21st centuries. And a significant driver of this increase has been the massive increase in Muslim students' school enrollments and hence of Islamic instruction, since it has generally remained part of school curricula. And behind this two-pronged long-term trend, that is the decrease in state religious expenditures relative to total state expenditures, combined with the increase in per capita exposure to public religious provisions, there are mechanistic effects linked to the massive and unprecedented in their magnitude expansion of the size of the state and increase in school enrollments. But there are also choices, such as the choice to generally keep some amount of Islamic instruction in school curricula. Let me insist on this notion of choice. Having a state-preferred religion is a choice, which in the modern period, at least, as I show in the book, has been made in full awareness of a wide array of alternative potential options. It is therefore not ineluctable. Unlike what we often hear, it is not that the political in Muslim states is inherently or predominantly religious, that Islam is an inherently political religion, or that it is more political than other religions. In fact, some Muslim majority polities do not have a state-preferred religion, and almost half of the rest of the world does. So to conclude, I would say that the state custodianship of Islam is well entrenched today in the Middle East and North Africa, contrary to those who claim that the modern state has annihilated Islamic institutions. It also continues to be vigorously discussed as to its extent, content, and institutional forms, often polarizing further the long-standing political cleavage on Islamic governance. So this is a great question. What inspired the new book is my long history with the study of religious institutions in the Middle East and North Africa. And this relationship I studied through the examination of the political and normative roles of religious scholars in the Middle East and North Africa, the ulama, but also through the study of Islamist movements. And so what I wanted to do is expand the chronology going back to the 19th century to understand better the broader debates about Islamic governance among political elites, but also ordinary people. And second, I was intrigued also to understand quantitatively what religion represented in the long history of modern societies of the Middle East and North Africa. Yeah. So the book has a constitutional history part, but also a chapter, chapter 5, on the political economy of religion through the study of public religious provisions. What excites me most about my field is that there is so much to be done. I think that some of the most interesting and intriguing studies examine the history of the modern Middle East in the longue durée in an effort to distinguish continuities from important ruptures. I am also excited by research on political thought that studies political cleavages about broad issues in the region, Islamic governance, for instance, as I did in the book, but also other issues, for instance, economic issues. I think we don't know about this enough. And although the democratic transitions after the Arab Spring did not last very long, I think they have allowed us to rethink political cleavages in new ways, through electoral sociology, for instance, but also in relation to long-standing debates. And I also see a young generation of scholars who are not afraid to be eclectic in their study of the Middle East. They use ethnographic methods, quantitative analysis, archival sources, and they often move beyond the study of representation to explore concrete issues. And these concrete issues in particular, in combination with representations, are particularly exciting today when thinking about the study of the modern Middle East and North Africa. I personally have very fond recollections of working with Kura, And it started 2 decades ago. I was invited by my dear colleague, Robert Hafner, to participate in a 2-part workshop in the fall of 2004 and spring of 2005, titled Madrasa, Modernity and Muslim Education. And it culminated in an edited volume by Robert Hafner and Mohammed Qasim Zaman, Schooling Islam, the Culture and Politics of Modern Muslim Education, which was published at Princeton University Press in 2007. And this was a wonderful experience for me. There were very thoughtful discussions about the legacy of madrasa education in modern times that have really shaped my own thinking about Islamic education. And I was invited again in 2013 to participate in a workshop on Sharia and Islamic ethics in transition in contemporary Muslim politics and culture. And the interaction with colleagues working on Indonesia, Egypt, Morocco, or Iran, to cite only a few, was extremely productive. And this was a great opportunity for me to start thinking about what will become chapter 3 of my new book. So I'm particularly appreciative of all these opportunities to participate in the academic and intellectual networks of Cura. And I very much look forward to my talk on March 6th over there.